Welcome to the Stay at Home Nurse Podcast. I'm your host, Deanna Cooper Gillingham. For over 25 years, I've strived to use my nurse credentials to find work that fit my lifestyle. Whether it was raising my 4 children and 3 fur babies, traveling the world, or moving to Mexico and living on the Caribbean Sea. Sometimes I succeeded and sometimes I failed, but I always learned from the experience. Now, I want to help you by sharing what worked and what didn't work. There are so many opportunities out there for nurses today. The Stay at Home Nurse Podcast will inspire and equip you to have a nursing career that is meaningful and supports your lifestyle. Now let's get started. Welcome to today's episode. Today, I would like to share with you a major mind shift change that I had that totally made a difference in the success of my nursing career. But first, I want to take just a minute to thank each and every one of you. I want to thank you for making this launch such a success. We actually made the iTunes charts under the business and careers category. So thank you all for all of your sharing and your liking and your subscribing. I really appreciate it. Today's episode was inspired by a listener email. The listener asked what I had done that hadn't worked and how I pivoted and changed that. So I started making a list because quite honestly, there were a lot of things. But this one really stood out to me as something I wanted to share with you because it's more of a mindset. And once I changed my mindset on this, a lot of other things started to change. So what was this mind shift change that I had? I started to change my mind shift in that other people were responsible for my happiness and my satisfaction, and started to realize that I myself was 100% responsible for my job and my career satisfaction. And that changed everything for me. Now, once again, I want to explain to you the difference between a job and a career. A job is just that one place that you go and you do your work and you come home. But your career is more than that. It is that job plus everything else that makes up who you are as a professional. I had a job, but I wanted a career. I wanted that satisfaction that a career brings. When you put all your eggs into the basket of one job or one employer, they can make your life miserable or they can make your life happy. But when I started to change my thinking of this job and started thinking in my long-term nursing career, things began to change for me. So one of the things that changed was the responsibility of my continuing education, certification, and just education in general. I used to think that it was my employer's responsibility to provide me opportunities to get continuing education. I also thought that if they wanted me to get certified, they should pay for it. And the same thing with any other type of education, like getting a BSN or a master's. Instead of saying this as a benefit, I saw it as something that I was entitled to. I know this is going to be a touchy subject for some people, but just hear me out to the end. And yes, I understand that our employer is responsible for having qualified staff, but that does not mean me in particular. If I lose my license, I'm gone. And it's my employer's responsibility to make sure that a licensed person that can fulfill the obligation to the patient is there, not necessarily that I am there. And the same goes for maintaining my required continuing education hours so that I can keep my license and to make sure that I am able to carry out my job duties. Now, yes, they do have competencies and skill checkoffs that they have to do to make sure that we meet these minimum guidelines. But do we really just want to meet the minimum guidelines? I think we owe it to our patients to do better than that. Making the mind shift change as to who was responsible for what changed my attitude, which in turn made me happier with my job and my career overall. And I want you to be happy with your career. So I want to share what I learned with you. I'm going to start off by giving you a few examples of how this happened in my career. One of the first jobs I had was an oncology nurse, and we were strongly encouraged to get certified. Now, we were so strongly encouraged that they just didn't suggest it to us, but our employer actually reimbursed us if we successfully passed the exam for the cost of the exam. They covered the cost of us attending preparation classes, and we got paid to go to the preparation classes. Now, believe it or not, I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but I actually grumbled that we didn't get paid to study on top of all of that. What I didn't realize at the time, but I found out a few years later, was that after I became oncology certified, I was much more marketable. This benefited me as much or more than it had benefited my employer. They basically paid for me to be able to go out and get another job. Another example of this is later in my career with my Certified Case Manager certification. This time, my employer only reimbursed us if we successfully passed the exam. I paid for all of my study materials and studied on my own time. But after becoming certified, I was able to get a new job, making more money, working 100% remotely. Again, this benefited me more than it benefited my employer. And even if I had not been reimbursed, getting certified was a great investment. I made over a 10 times return on that investment in 1 year alone. That is a 1,000% return on investment. You cannot get that kind of return on investment anywhere. So the fact that they reimbursed me for my certification cost was a real benefit. And it was really nice of them considering they made me more marketable to other companies. This does not just apply to certifications. It also applies to courses that you may be sent to through your employer and continuing education that's provided by your employer. I worked for an employer that sent us through classes which provided continuing education on advanced fetal monitoring. Yes, it benefited them for us to have this training, but ultimately I'm responsible for the care that I provide to my patients. That is why when I renew my license, I need to have the continuing education. But once again, this continuing education that was paid for by my employer actually benefited me. When I was moving and needed to get a new job, I was able to put this continuing education on advanced fetal monitoring on my resume, which helped me to be hired by another employer. Many times we see having to get continuing education to renew our license as a burden. And yes, I have been so guilty of this. We look for the easiest and the cheapest continuing education to get. We're looking for the free continuing education so we can just get those hours in. But is this really in our patient's best interest? Yes, our employer has a responsibility to the patient, but as a licensed professional, so do I. When I shifted and started seeing my continuing education as my responsibility, I chose topics that I was interested in and that were relevant to my current position or a position I wanted to pursue. This helped me to grow in my profession and advance my career. It also made me happier at work because I felt more comfortable having this knowledge. And finally, once again, it made me more marketable. I was able to place on my resume X number of hours of continuing education on a specific topic under my education on my resume. And I would change this depending on the position that I was applying for. This showed potential employers that I was up to date and current on best practices and that I was interested in the specialty that I had applied for, even if I didn't have actual work experience in that specialty. I'm telling you this because I want you to love your nursing career. And this simple mind shift change that I made helped me. And I'm hoping that you will find it helpful too. Once again, I would really like to thank you for helping us to have a successful podcast launch with the Stay at Home Nurse podcast. Thank you for your ratings, thank you for your reviews, and thank you for sharing this with your friends. If you have a friend who you think would benefit from listening to this podcast, share it with them. They'll thank you for it. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you leave a rating or review. And if you have a question you would like me to answer or a topic you would like me to cover, email me at hello@thestayathomenurse.com. I look forward to hearing from you.